What does "you shall not steal" mean?
Like you don't take something that someone has or anything. Like when they're playing with it and you just like take it out of their hands. Or like when someone's not playing with it, you just take it secretly.
So what do you think that means?
It means to not take something that's not yours.
Why would God tell us that?
Because then the other person won't like it and want it back really bad.
Why do you think people steal things?
Because they want what others have.
I'm going to show you a picture. Take a look at this picture. This picture is a painting by Leslie Thrasher that first appeared in the 1936 issue of the Saturday Evening Post. Okay, digest it. Okay, here's what we got. We got a very dignified, well put together older lady. She's at the butcher shop. Looks like she's purchasing a turkey. You got the butcher on the right. They're both gazing up at the dial on the scale. Now notice what her finger's doing. Notice what his finger's doing. She's trying to nudge things in her direction. He's trying to nudge things in his direction. And of course, the reason they have the facial expressions they have is because neither is aware of what the other's doing. Cecil Myers, commenting on this painting, said this: both the butcher and the lovely lady would resent being called thieves. The lovely lady would never rob a bank or steal a car. The butcher would be indignant if anyone accused him of stealing, and if a customer gave him a bad check, he would call the police. But neither saw anything wrong with a little deception that would make a few cents for one or save a few cents for the other. This innocent, cute, even humorous painting portrays the subtle way in which theft comes to saturate a society, all the while viewing it the way we did, with a wry grin. But the actions taking place in this painting are precisely what the 8th commandment is guarding against. Exodus 20, verse 15, very simple. You shall not steal. We're up to the 8th in our journey through the 10 commandments this summer. We're going to attack theft from 3 different angles. We're going to hit types of theft, the root cause of theft, and hope for the thief in all of us. Types of theft, the root cause of theft, and hope for the thief in all of us. Now, intuitively, I think when you hear the word steal or theft, you know immediately this is going to have very wide-ranging application. How many different things can human beings steal? I mean, we'd be all afternoon come up with a list. As Yahweh expounded the 8th commandment in the chapters that follow Exodus 20, he actually provides a pretty lengthy and detailed list of what his people were prohibited from stealing. One of the first places he starts is in chapter 21, verse 16. Here's what he says: whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him, shall be put to death. God's redeemed people, that's where these 10 commandments go first. His redeemed people, those he'd rescued out of slavery in Egypt, were prohibited from stealing and buying people. Now, remember when we looked at 1 Timothy 1 a couple weeks ago, Paul was working through the second table of the 10 commandments in chapter 1, commandments 5 through 10. And he was expounding them for Timothy, who's pastoring a church in Ephesus. And he's making application of those commandments, the second table. He's making application for us as New Testament, New Covenant Christians. One application of "you shall not steal" he brings up is slave trading. Enslaving. So Paul takes the 8th commandment and applies that commandment to those who take people. The whole slave system in the New World and other parts of the world worked by forcibly taking people from their homeland. The chattel slavery in our nation's history would be outlawed by the 8th commandment. If you keep going in the book of Exodus to chapter 22, that contains a litany of provisions for the protection of personal property. So for example, if you damage something you borrow, you had to make restitution. If you found your neighbor's animal wandering, you had to return it or take care of it until the owner could reclaim it. If a friend gave you one of his possessions for safekeeping while he was on vacation, full responsibility for the protection of that item was placed on your shoulders. The command against stealing went so far that if an Israelite stumbled upon his enemy's ox wandering about, the Israelite was obligated to return it. So you couldn't take, destroy, or treat with indifference even your enemy's stuff. So let's back up here just for a minute and see what the commandments are doing. Now, they have far-reaching implications and applications. We see how the New Testament expounds on that. But if we just start at the core of each of them from 5 on, what do we have? What do we have? Picture what a society shaped by these would look like. So in Commandment 5, we've got honor your father and mother. Respect, honor, and dignity to dad and mom. Then we move to the 6th. You shall not murder. Respect, dignity, and honor given to the bodily well-being of other people. 7, you shall not commit adultery. Respect, honor, and dignity given to another's spouse. 8, respect, honor, and dignity given to other people's stuff. That's a pretty cool culture to be in, wouldn't you say? Pretty amazing culture. Which means, of course, that the 8th commandment assumes private property ownership, not communal ownership. Don't get me started on that, okay? Just bookmark that for future reflection. So what are the things that we can steal? One of the things we can steal is money, possessions. So let's go through the list. Let's just agree amongst us all that things like pickpocketing, burglary, robbery, shoplifting, all of that falls under this category of stealing money or possessions. But there are all sorts of examples of theft. So for example, the scriptures have a lot to say about false weights and measures. False weights and measures. The modern equivalent of this would be overpricing goods and services. Those of you who work in the business world who have some control over this, be conscientious about what you charge for goods and services that your business provides. Be conscientious of that. The counsel that Martin Luther gave the shoemaker in his town who had become a believer is classic. Everybody knows it, but it's so fundamental and so good. Shoemaker became a Christian, came to Luther and said, what should I do now? As if to say, I should probably become a pastor, right? Missionary, is that what Christians do? Luther said, no, you don't need to do that. Just keep making shoes. Make a good shoe and sell it at a fair price. Make a good shoe and sell it at a fair price. Perfect. There's the Christian calling and vocation. Oh, we could add to this list, right? We could add embezzlement to the list. A person who takes money or assets that were entrusted to them and uses them for unauthorized purposes. How about larceny? Let's add larceny to this list, the unlawful taking of property. Here's a picture of the Hotel Zaza in downtown Dallas, Texas. Dallas, Texas. First year of operation, this hotel reported having to replace, you ready? Having to replace 38,000 spoons, 18,000 tiles, 355 coffee pots, and 100 Bibles. I'm sure the Gideons were ecstatic about that. But the other stuff was probably an issue. That's an issue. I mean, who's taking the spoons? By the way, if you were one of those who swiped a coffee pot, would you please return it to the Hotel Zaza in Dallas, Texas? Let's add extortion to the list or racketeering to the list. The fact that there are so many different words in the English language to specifically define some type of theft ought to remind us of how prevalent the problem is. We could keep going. Should we keep going? Let's keep going. Citizens steal from government. How do we steal from government? Underpaying taxes, making false claims for disability and Social Security. Now, the government steals too. With its huge bureaucracy, the federal government commits theft on a national scale by wasting public money, accumulating debt without fully and planning to repay. That's theft. A little closer to home, when the Lord is addressing his covenant people through the prophet Malachi, he points out how many of them were withholding their tithe. And Yahweh uses the language of robbery to describe that, which means what for our money and possessions? It means God owns what you have. You're a manager. Stinginess is theft. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So here's what I did. I worked through these examples of theft, and I thought to myself, wow, what would the world be like if there was no stealing? Just let your mind go there for a minute. What would the world be like if there was no stealing? Well, first of all, you would never have to lock the door to your house. Think about it. Did we lock the door? Did you close the garage door before we left on that vacation? How many conversations have ensued between husband and wife? Did you forget to? Well, you don't have to worry about it. There's no stealing. You never have to lock the door of your car. Don't worry about it. There's no stealing. You could let the whole world know your social security number. You could let the whole world know your social security number. Remember when that guy who founded LifeLock? Remember LifeLock, the founder? The first commercial, he hit a home run with his first commercial. He put, allegedly, his social security number on the trailer of a semi-truck and drove it through New York City. Big on the side of a trailer. Yeah, you could do that. You wouldn't have to worry about it because there's no theft. I mean, when I'm logging into whatever I'm logging into, and I'm trying to remember one of the 8 possible passwords I use for this site, why do you have a password? Because they're stealing. You wouldn't need a password. We wouldn't need copyright laws, patent laws, intellectual property rights. Boy, when you start thinking about it, the world would be a marvelous place if there was no stealing. It almost sounds like heaven. And I would say, indeed, among God's redeemed people especially, there should be no stealing. Because the church is a foretaste of heaven. It's where we give each other and others a taste of what heaven will be like, where there will be no stealing. Now, with tongue in cheek, I say that our bloated lost and found stash would be some indicator that ABC is doing fairly well. You're not running off with each other's stuff. This is just a creative way to get a PSA in on, if you've lost something here and you've not picked it up, could you please go check the lost and found stash? Now, that list is just dealing with money and possessions, but those aren't the only items that can be stolen. Very briefly, I'll mention 2 more. 1, time. Time can be stolen. How can time be stolen? When employees are hired, they contract to work so many hours for so much pay. But how often do they fail to hold up their end of the deal? We've all been there. We start late, finish early, stretch coffee, lunch, and tea breaks, and waste time in between. This is theft. You're stealing time. In a techno world, we rob our employers of the work that we owe them when, while on the clock, we start playing games, computer games. We surf the web while on the clock. Let me just say it this way. Whenever we give anything less than our best effort, we are robbing our employer of the productivity we owe. So money and possession aren't the only things that can be stolen. Time can be stolen. Here's another thing that can be stolen. Reputation can be stolen. Now, how would you steal someone's reputation? Very simply, by destroying someone's credit using gossip or slander. We're going to do a deep dive into this next week when we get to the 9th commandment. Summarized, gossip and slander is a breach of the 9th commandment, but its effect is a breach of the 8th. It steals someone's reputation. And in my view, gossip and slander is the stage 4 pancreatic cancer of the American church. Shakespeare put it this way. He said, "Who steals my purse steals trash, but he that flinches from me my good name makes me poor indeed." Take my money, it's just rubbish. Steal my wallet, so what? Take my good name and you impoverish me. The tongue is a prolific thief. Now, as hard as it is to believe, these types of theft that I've highlighted, just a drop in the bucket. There are innumerable ways to steal. And while I think it's good for us as Christians to do some deep introspection on this, where have I stolen? What have I stolen? It may be a wiser approach to determine the root of all this theft, because there is one common root to all theft. There's one common root to all theft. Wilhelmus à Brakel was a Dutch pastor in the 1600s. He's got a massive 4-volume work entitled Christian's Reasonable Service, and as a lot of old-time theologians did, they'll take time to expound the 10 Commandments. So he's got a sizable chunk within one of his volumes where he does that. And you get to the chapter on the 8th commandment, you shall not steal. In the opening paragraph of the chapter on that commandment, here's what he writes. He says, just as God apportioned Canaan to Israel by lot, he likewise gives everyone his portion in this world, giving the one a greater portion than the other. That portion he will have, no more and no less. Man must be satisfied with his portion and expect it from the Lord by the means which have been ordained to that end. God has therefore expressly forbidden the acquisition of our portion or a desire for increase through unlawful means by saying, thou shalt not steal. And you're looking at that and you're saying, it's 11:30 in the morning, it's cloudy, it's raining, and that's the 1600s. You expect me to grab that? Let me riff on this for a minute. What you have and your station in life has not come to you by random chance. What you have and your station in life has not come to you by random chance. What you have and your station in life has come to you by the wise distribution of the Lord. This is called providence. The root cause of theft, listen carefully, the root cause of theft is ultimately distrust in the Lord's portioning. The root cause of theft is distrust in the Lord's portioning, distrust in the Lord's providence. If we don't have something, it's because God has ordained we not have that thing. To steal something God has not given us is to reject his ordering of our lives and a failure to trust that his portioning is good. I would argue that this was part of the first sin. Adam and Eve stole something that didn't belong to them. That tree was not theirs. It was God's. But they rejected his ordering of their lives and failed to trust that what he had given them was good and sufficient. The root cause of theft is distrust in the Lord's portioning, distrust in the Lord's providence, and it is an assault on God's portioning for our lives. Now, I'm going to take this even further because it's not just about you, it's about who you've taken from. Stealing is also an assault on God's providence for other people. God's portioning for others. It robs what he has provided for someone else. So not only does stealing say, God's portion for me is insufficient, so I'm going to take in order to remedy that. Stealing also says God's portioning for that other person is excessive, so I'm going to take in order to remedy that. The root that feeds theft is distrust in the Lord. The root that feeds theft is distrust in God's portioning. Theft makes a critical statement about God. It says, God, you did not distribute time, talent, and treasure rightly. You didn't get this right. The root that feeds theft is distrust in the Lord's portioning, which means the herbicide that kills the thorny weed of theft is contentment. The herbicide that kills the thorny weed of theft is contentment. We're going to talk a lot about contentment when we get to the 10th commandment. But just for a quick minute here, let's think about the virtue of contentment and how it influences other commandments. Just think about contentment and how it influences other commandments. The content person is able to cease from their work and rest. The content person does not lash out in physical or verbal violence towards another. The content person remains committed in thought and deed to one's spouse. The content person perceives no need to rearrange God's portioning. You see? Contentment is the herbicide that kills numerous thorny weeds, which is why I would contend contentment is the ultimate Christian virtue. Contentment is the ultimate Christian virtue. Somebody's going to say, well, love is the ultimate Christian virtue. Watch a discontent person try to love. Contentment is what enables you to truly love another. Love needs to be fed by the ultimate Christian virtue of contentment. I'm sure some of you heard this story. This was years ago, but it was all over the news. Gary Foster was his name. He was assistant vice president for Citigroup. It amazes me he pulled this off, but somehow he successfully stole $22 million over the course of 8 years. $22 million over the course of 8 years. Obviously, when they caught wind of it, the fraud team began investigating. When they began investigating, what they expected to uncover was some sort of desperate situation in Gary's life. They expected to uncover major medical bills or addiction issues or gambling, something of that sort. They did not expect to find what they did. The trigger was Gary discovering a colleague, a subordinate who was making $10,000 more per year than he was. That was the trigger. So he rationalized his theft as payback for what he deserved. And of course, it spiraled out of control. It didn't stop with 10 grand, clearly. And in Gary's case, by the way, it wasn't that he needed the money. He was fine. I don't know where Gary stands with the Lord, but if we were to insert a God lens over that, Gary started stealing as a way to fix God's mistake. Gary started stealing as a way to fix God's mistake. Rule of thumb, we make a mistake when we fix God's mistake. We make a mistake when we try to fix God's mistake. The herbicide that kills the thorny weed of theft is contentment. Contentment, Christian, would make you much happier, joy-filled, peaceful than you are now. It is the ultimate Christian virtue. Well, let's finish with some good news. What's the hope for the thief in all of us? You know, one of the benefits of studying the 10 Commandments is that they do confront us with our sin. And historically, throughout church history, this is one of the uses of the 10 Commandments. When we explore their full implications, we discover that we're not capable of keeping a single commandment in all its integrity. And so the law condemns us. It declares to you, it declares to me, you are the idolater, you are the foul-mouthed sinner, you are the Sabbath breaker and rebel, you are the murderer, the adulterer, the thief. The law says all of that to us so that we understand we are guilty sinners who need the gospel. We need the gospel. In Matthew's gospel account, we read this: 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus was crucified between 2 thieves. But as far as God's justice was concerned, there were really 3 thieves on crosses that day. The 2 who died for their own crimes, and the one who took our sins upon himself. See, in the cross, Jesus voluntarily made himself an accomplice of our cosmic crimes, was convicted of being an accomplice of those crimes, and underwent the due penalty for those crimes: death on a cross, bearing the weight of God's wrath against sin. But therein lies the great comfort for anyone who has ever broken the 8th commandment. When Jesus died on the cross, he died for thieves, so that every thief who trusts in him will be saved. Isn't it remarkable, friends? Isn't it remarkable? These words that Christians say so often, the first person to hear those words was a thief. You will be with me in paradise. How often have we said that? How often have we taken those words upon our lips? We love that language. We love that line from Jesus. And who's the first one to hear it? It was a thief. You will be with me in paradise. That's hope for the thief in all of us. Michael Franzese was once a high-ranking member of the Colombo crime family in New York, where he was deeply involved in extortion, racketeering, tax fraud, theft. He made millions illegally through gas tax scams and other schemes. At one point, you could say the pinnacle of his career, his crime-ridden career, he was making between $8 and $10 million per week. But despite his success, in his own words, he was empty. Here's what he said. He said, I had all the money, all the power. I had houses, cars, women, everything I thought would make me happy. And I was more miserable than ever. I had no peace. But miraculously, something changed in Michael. What changed? Franzi's turning point came when he met a Christian woman by the name of Camille, who eventually became his wife. Through her quiet but steady witness and his time in prison, where he spent years in solitary confinement, Franzese began reading the Bible. And slowly he saw the hollowness of his greed and crime, and he surrendered his life to Jesus. Today, Michael Franzese speaks around the world, warning others about the false promises of money and power. He's a committed Christian, husband, father, lives a much simpler life than before, and says on this side of his conversion, he says, I gave up millions, but I gained peace, real peace. I used to steal to fill the emptiness, but now I have joy that no money could ever buy. Jesus came for the thief. He came to live a theft-free life in the place of thieves, to suffer the just judgment every thief deserves, and to give the thief mercy, grace, forgiveness, and abundant life no amount of money or possessions could ever provide. So Jesus says, to every thief who repents and believes, you will be with me in paradise. That's hope for the thief in all of us. Let's pray. Merciful God, your law does expose the truth, and the truth is we are not righteous. We are idolaters, lawbreakers, and thieves. And we stand condemned before you. But we praise you for the cross, where your Son stood in our place, bearing our guilt and shame. Father, I want to thank you that the picture of Jesus on the cross is him dying between two thieves, because he came to save thieves like us. And Father, we confess our attempts to fill our emptiness with what doesn't satisfy. We do that all the time. Forgive us. Give us the joy that no money, no power, no stolen treasure can offer. Like the thief on the cross, God, we trust in your Son Jesus. And we cling to his promise, today you will be with me in paradise. We praise you for that. In your name, amen.